It is pretty stunning. It really is. Let us check in, and now I understand we have with us Oliver McGee. How are you, Ollie?
Hello, how are you?
I am wonderful. Oliver McGee in 1997 was a top 30 finalist for the White House Fellows Program. On the Presidential Commission on White House Fellows was the late Theodore Sorensen. During what Mr. McGee, Professor McGee says, was a 3-day life-changing experience, he shared a bus ride with Ted Sorensen from the Blair House to the Naval Academy, where they were stationed for their interviews. Sorensen shared with him an intimate story and what it was like when they found out the news of JFK's assassination. And if you have a question or a comment, we're going to give you our backup number today, 540-437-4875. And we say a very pleasant good afternoon. Oliver McGee, professor at Howard University. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I am doing wonderfully. If you would, what was it like meeting and getting a chance to talk to Ted Sorensen?
Well, it was really a surprise. What happens in the White House Fellows, it's a very wonderful experience. And when I look back on it, it's sort of like going through some of the reality television shows that you see nowadays, but at that time we had no idea what they were like. It's the White House Fellows experience is sort of like a Noah's Ark. They carry in the top 30 finalists two of every kind, 2 lawyers, 2 scientists, 2 business folks, a number of military folks. And so we're all really sort of kind of getting to know each other. And I do recall that one of the first persons that were in my top 30 finalist class was Sanjay Gupta, who's with CNN.
Mm-hmm.
I found him to be pretty interesting because obviously the scientists gravitated to each other and then was the brain surgeon. But what was interesting is that they oftentimes split you up and go into different trips and things, and you're on bus rides with meeting with different people who are on the commission. And so they sort of mix it up so you get a chance to accidentally stumble into interesting people. And so I stumbled into Ted Sorensen. And I was sitting on the bus, and he came by, and he said, "Hello, young fella, can I sit next to you?" And I said, "Sure." And,
did you know who he was?
I did. He obviously, as a gentleman, formally introduced himself, and he was a very soft-spoken man, very stately, I came away with him to be a very, very kind gentleman. He said, "Hello, my name is Ted." I said, "Yes, hello, Mr. Sorensen." He says, "You can call me Ted." And we started to have a conversation. And most of the time what they're doing is they're allowing you to ask them questions of anything. And I was talking with him about presidential decision-making because he has a really excellent book on decision-making in the White House, and we were talking about that. And then the conversation gravitated towards I was curious as to how did he feel on that fateful day, and then he went into a really very detailed, riveting story on how it felt for them to, how they found out about the event. He was really with the president and or nearby, and when they were traveling back to the White House on the plane, and they went back to the Oval Office, he described how it felt for some of the key staffers to go into the office, and then obviously they were sitting around the desk and looking at the president's desk and knowing that their fallen leader was not returning. And he was describing the solemn feeling that was in the White House and how everyone was really very, very saddened.
Ted Sorensen was very much the crafter of the mythology of Camelot, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. I would like to, after having a momentous moment of meeting a statesman like that, you become a really, really big follower of their writings and reading of the writings. And I have just about everything that Ted Sorensen's written. And one of my favorite books is his book on decision-making in the White House. I find it extremely authoritative. And what you come away with is that oftentimes the speechwriter is the voice of the president. The great presidential guru at Harvard, Dick Neustadt, said the president has 3 powers: the power to appoint, the power to assign, and most importantly, the power to persuade. And so the speechwriter for which Ted Sorensen was for Kennedy was the voice of Kennedy, and he was the engine behind Kennedy's power of persuasion.
The other thing, and by the way, if you have a question for Oliver McGee, our phone line is 540 or 437-4875, 437-4875. It's always interesting. I remember as a youngster, and I was quite young when President Kennedy was elected, but I was cognizant because he was the first real televised president.
Yes.
What he did, and you mentioned Ted Sorensen's speech writing. There are, Kennedy's speeches were very well known, and they were, they weren't parsed the way presidential speeches are today, but it was really uplifting rhetoric. But when I think of President Kennedy, you think of just the charm he ended up showing in press conferences, because he was able to poke fun at the media. It was a different era. It wasn't a gotcha media that we have today. But it was fascinating, the give and take at press conferences, and he loved press conferences. And he just had this wit that was really kind of stunning. When I was talking to you about doing this show, Bobby Kennedy's reaction, if there was somebody who morphed after the Kennedy assassination, it was Robert Kennedy, wasn't it?
Yes. Robert, I remember one of the things that when I was listening to Ted Sorensen describe and take me to his perspective on what was happening in that fateful day at the Oval Office, he brought to the discussion how solemn and how really devastating Bobby was. What he had shared with me is that it was particularly painful for him because he had just lost his brother. He said the rest of the staff were really mourning the fact that they had lost their fallen leader, but Bobby was much more pained because he had lost a fallen brother, and that made it even more compounding. And I remember listening, and that was the great thing about the experiences is with the bus ride where I was really listening. You kind of know when you must be quiet when you're listening to history like that. I remember feeling the pain of that moment because Ted Sorensen was a wonderful storyteller. I think he had a really wonderful persona about him and a gift of the word. And you pick that up in just the brief moments that you're with him in that time. I also had an opportunity to meet him once I got into the White House because, interestingly enough, the White House Fellows Program is a very wonderful process, and it's a stiff competition. And I wasn't selected as a White House Fellow, but the president of MIT at the time, who was Chuck Vest, who was a very good friend with the Clinton science advisor, picked up the phone after I shared with him and said, "I just didn't quite make it, Chuck." And he picked up the phone and called his friend Jack Gibbons and said, "Have I got a science policy guy for you?" Just fell short at the White House Fellows Program, and so next thing you know, I was thrust right into the White House just shortly after that. And one of the first persons I met in the hallway was Ted Sorensen, and he came back and said, "Young fellow, you finally made it. I see you actually made it after all." So I felt a sense of a big brother or a grandfatherly love from that. So my impressions of him is an extraordinarily nice and very sweet man, very much so, but very persuasive.
Did he believe that it was Lee Harvey Oswald?
No, we didn't get into that discussion. That was the interesting part. He didn't.
Well, you've read all of his writings and such. I wonder if he's ever commented on the Warren report and whatever.
No, I don't come away with the sense of him actually believing one way or the other. He is sort of I guess I would call his writing an honest broker. Mm-hmm. More focused on the environment of the president and the decision-making process in the presidency, perspective I wouldn't say a historian because that's Arthur Schlesinger, but he gives a close perspective of the president and an authoritative one because it's apparent that Kennedy trusted him deeply.
Professor Oliver McGee, we appreciate your time. If someone wants to learn more about you, how do they do that? You have a website, don't you?
Yes, olivermcgee.org, and we're all right now doing a revamp of it, but it's available now. And I really would, it's dedicated to establishing partnership possibilities for America. And we'll have a number of materials coming out on that. And I'm about to release a book, Jumping the Aisle, and four other books on university administration that will be available on the website.
I appreciate your time. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much.
That's Professor Oliver McGee of Howard University. We'll be back with Rach on the Radio, a look at sports, all up ahead.